While researching for my novel and trying to understand rampage killers and active shooters, I ran across several examples of one type of attacker called an injustice collector, which was a new term to me. An injustice collector is somebody who is best described as an extreme grudge holder. They like to keep a running tab of all the times they have been wronged by others, whether that wrong was real or perceived, and they do not forgive others for those wrongs. In fact, they hold on to these grudges for very long periods of time. The term injustice collector was created by FBI profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole, who was reviewing school attackers and found that many of them were committing the violence as an act of revenge for all of the wrongs made against them. These wrongs can be minor things, such as insults, if someone has an argument or disagreement with them, if someone declines an offer made by them, or some accidental or unintentional act that in some way disrespects or slights them. Injustice collectors will perceive these slights as intentional and directed at them, and they often keep lists, written or mental, of those who have wronged them. As far as I can tell, injustice collector is not an official diagnosis, though it may be part of paranoid personality disorder, which is in the DSM-5. Somebody with paranoid personality disorder is very distrustful of others, sees threatening or malicious intent where there is none, and holds grudges, which sounds similar to an injustice collector. Lots of people can be injustice collectors, but only a few go on a violent rampage to punish those who wrong them. Those who are violent will overreact to these wrongs, doing far more damage than what was done to them. I'll go over some notable cases of rampage killers or active shooters who fit the description of injustice collector. Many of them targeted those people or institutions they thought had slighted them. One of the most infamous cases of an injustice collector was Marvin Heemeyer, a middle-aged muffler shop owner in a small town in Colorado who had a lot of conflicts with individuals and authorities in the town. Over a period of months, he outfitted a bulldozer with half-inch thick steel plate armor, concrete, bulletproof glass, cameras, monitors, guns, and gun ports, and went on a spree of destruction, destroying numerous buildings, flattening parked cars, and shooting out of his gun ports. He targeted businesses, offices, and homes of those he believed had wronged him in an hours-long act of revenge, causing millions of dollars of damage. Because of the armor, police and even civilians with their own construction vehicles could not stop him. The attack ended when the bulldozer got stuck and he took his own life. Though Heemeyer was the only one to die, he did attempt to kill others by shooting out of his bulldozer, including firing a .50 caliber rifle at large propane tanks near residences, firing at vehicles, and he nearly killed some people, including children, during his unscheduled building demolitions. Heemeyer had a long-running feud with a family that owned a concrete business. The family initially tried to purchase his muffler shop property, but negotiations fell through, so they bought land next to his muffler shop and sought approval from the zoning board to build a new concrete plant there. Heemeyer did everything he could to stop the approval, but ultimately, he lost. The first buildings he targeted during the attack belonged to the concrete company. He also targeted businesses owned by the council members who had voted for the approval. In another feud, Heemeyer was a strong supporter of legalizing gambling. When interviewed by a reporter from a local newspaper who opposed legalized gambling, their disagreement became so heated they almost got into a fight. He would later bulldoze that newspaper office. And in another heated moment, when a customer refused to pay him for installing the wrong muffler on her vehicle, Heemeyer threatened to kill the customer's husband. During the rampage, local law enforcement told the husband to stay away because he likely would have been targeted. After the attack, authorities found a handwritten list of 107 people he believed had wronged him. In April 2020, in Canada, a wealthy middle-aged denture fitter named Wortman went on a shooting and arson rampage through Nova Scotia over a 13-hour period, murdering 22 before he was shot and killed by police. As a child, the perpetrator had been abused, and as an adult, he was known to be violent, abused his common-law wife, engaged in shady financial deals and smuggling, illegally obtained firearms, was an alcoholic, and liked to collect police vehicles and police memorabilia. He dressed in a police uniform and drove an imitation police car during the crime spree, sometimes pulling people over like it was a traffic stop and shooting everyone in the car. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police stated that he was an injustice collector. He had a history of getting into disputes with neighbors, relatives, and business partners, and held grudges for years. He knew some of his victims and targeted them. One of the first victims was a neighbor across the street who had purchased her house from the attacker's uncle. Wortman had helped his uncle with buying the house originally and got his name on the title, but did not allow his name to be taken off the title, even after his uncle paid him back. When the uncle sold the house, there was a legal battle between Wortman and his uncle over proceeds from the sale, which the uncle won. They never had any contact with each other after that. Wortman may have blamed his neighbor for the dispute between him and his uncle. Wortman was also very upset that a neighbor's house had masonry similar to his own, and believed the neighbors had copied him. Also, a former neighbor had moved away years before the rampage due to Wortman's violence and behavior. There are some reports that he had a hit list, according to a neighbor who survived the attack. The neighbor said that law enforcement had told him that he had been on the list, even though the only thing the neighbor had done to Wortman was refuse to sell a police car to him. The Bath School disaster is a case mentioned by Mary Ellen O'Toole as an example of an injustice collector. In 1927, in Michigan, a man blew up a school, killing 44 people and himself in the deadliest attack on a school in American history. Andrew Kehoe was a handyman, farmer, and school board member who had been doing maintenance on the school and used that work to transport a large amount of explosives into the basement and wired it for detonation. On the day of his attack, Kehoe killed his wife, blew up his house and farm, and blew up the north wing of the school because Kehoe had rigged it to detonate at a certain time. Neighbors, parents, and other citizens responded to the school to help, and Kehoe drove his truck to the school. He had filled his truck with explosives and metal objects, called the school superintendent over, and set off the dynamite in his truck. The truck explosion took Kehoe's life, the superintendent's, and a few others, including a student who had survived the first blast. Hundreds of pounds of more explosives were later found hidden in the school basement that had failed to go off. If it had, the death toll could have been as high as 200. Andrew Kehoe was an extreme grudge holder. He had a history of not getting along with others. If something did not go his way, he would have bitter tantrums. Years before the attack, his property taxes had been steeply raised to pay for the expensive school building, and he was very upset about this. He and his wife had no children, so they wouldn't see any benefit from increased school funding. On top of that, his wife was sick and possibly had tuberculosis, an incurable disease back in those days, and the medical care was costing him a lot. At the same time, he had been served a foreclosure notice for his farm. The sheriff who delivered the paperwork reported that Kehoe said that if it hadn't been for the school tax, he would have been able to pay off the mortgage on his farm. Kehoe also said to a different person that if he couldn't live in his house, then no one could. In 1924, Kehoe was elected to the school board. On the school board, he caused all sorts of problems because he would not compromise on almost anything. He did not want to spend more taxpayer dollars on school resources, but the superintendent did. He had it out for the superintendent, fighting to get rid of him. He would become enraged over minor issues and try to stop a meeting when he lost. In 1925, the township clerk passed away, and Kehoe was appointed as an acting clerk. However, he did not win the next election because word had spread about how difficult he was on the school board. He also once shot and killed a neighbor's dog. Accounts vary on the circumstances, but it was likely because the dog was barking a lot and annoying him. Kehoe blamed the school as the source of his troubles as his finances, reputation, and wife's health fell apart. He believed a lot of injustices had been done to him and sought revenge against the school in the most extreme way possible. If he couldn't get what he wanted, then neither could anybody at the school. I have a full deep dive video on my channel about the Bath School disaster. Another injustice collector was Howard Unruh, a homosexual World War II veteran who killed 13 people in his neighborhood in New Jersey in 1949. He feuded with his neighbors and kept records of every single time he had been wronged or slighted by them. This included the Cohens, who owned a drugstore. Unruh believed that Mr. Cohen had shortchanged him 5 times, and Mrs. Cohen had told Unruh to turn down his music. Other injustices were neighbors who left trash in his backyard, left dirt in a nearby yard that caused drainage problems and Unruh's cellar to flood, and a boy that Unruh believed was stealing his electricity. He also thought that others knew that he was gay. He said that Mr. Cohen had called him a homophobic slur, and other neighbors were telling stories of him engaging in homosexual acts. Because it was 1949, Unruh could not be openly gay, and homosexual acts were illegal. Unruh built a fence as part of his feud with his neighbors, and one night, after failing to meet up with a man at a movie theater, he noticed that the gate had either been damaged or had gone missing. Sources vary. He woke up the next morning and went on his rampage. Several of his victims had been in his records for wronging him, which included both of the Cohens, but Unruh also shot others nearby, just because they were in his line of sight. Unruh was deemed to be criminally insane and never had a trial, and spent the rest of his life in a psychiatric institution. James Huberty killed 22 people at a McDonald's in San Ysidro, California in 1984 using an Uzi, pump-action shotgun, and a handgun. Though there are many different factors to this case, Huberty had a history of overreacting when things didn't go his way. The day before the attack, Huberty told his wife that he had called a mental health clinic and they were supposed to call him back, but never did. He said something along the lines of, "Society had their chance." There is another source where he says the same thing when he entered the McDonald's and started shooting. In addition to running amok because of difficulty getting a mental health appointment, Huberty had earlier been laid off from a lucrative job as a welder and said that if he couldn't provide for his wife and children, he was going to bring down everyone else with him. He was paranoid and liked to get revenge for any wrongs made against him. A neighbor reported that one time, Huberty's dog scratched Huberty's car, so he pulled out his gun and shot it. In 1959, Paul Orgren, who was in his 40s, brought his young son to an elementary school in Houston and tried to enroll his son in the school. Classes had begun a week earlier, and school was in session on the day of his visit. However, Orgren did not have a health certificate or any other paperwork for his child, and didn't know his address because he had just arrived in town. He said he would come back the next day with the right documents, but he returned minutes later at the playground, which was full of children, carrying a briefcase. He spoke to a teacher and attempted to get more children to come near him. He handed the teacher some poorly written notes and said that if the school wouldn't take his son, he would blow up the school, and he spoke about God's will. There was a doorbell on the suitcase, which Orgren used to detonate explosives inside, estimated to be 6 sticks of dynamite, killing himself, his son, 2 children, the custodian, and a teacher, as well as injuring over a dozen students and school employees, some of them severely. Orgren had a criminal history as a safecracker and an unsavory past, though I couldn't find a history of him overreacting to inconveniences. Because it took him a short period of time to get the briefcase means he must have obtained the explosives and rigged the briefcase before he went to the school. Either he anticipated that the school wouldn't enroll his son, or he was just waiting for someone or some institution to wrong him and kept the briefcase for revenge. The fact that he tried to get more children to move near him showed that he was trying to take as many people with him as he could. In 2013, a Navy veteran and contractor murdered 12 people at the Washington Navy Yard. He showed signs of mental illness, believing that low-frequency electromagnetic waves were controlling him, and also showed signs of injustice collecting. Back in 2004, he was very upset at construction workers parking at a construction site close to the house he was staying in. The construction workers said he had been staring at them every day for a month, until one day he came out of his house, drew a gun, and shot out the tires of one of the workers' cars. He was arrested and told police that the workers had mocked and disrespected him. Although a spree killer, ex-LAPD officer Christopher Dorner is another example of an injustice collector. Believing he had been wrongfully terminated from the police force for making false statements accusing another officer of kicking a mentally ill man, Dorner went on a campaign of revenge, killing and injuring police officers he believed had wronged him, as well as targeting their family members. He posted a lengthy manifesto online that recounted times where he had been wronged, going all the way back to the first grade when another student called him a racial slur. Dorner responded to the slur with violence and was angry when he was disciplined by the principal for resorting to violence. He wrote about another incident when he overheard two fellow officers use the N-word in his presence. Dorner told them not to say it. They then doubled down on using it. He lunged at one of the officers and choked him before other officers separated them. He raged at the LAPD for the investigation that led to his termination and named the officers he thought had wronged him. There are more cases I found in my research, but I only went over the most notable ones in this video. From what I found, injustice collectors are a common type of rampage killer, and not just in the US, but in other countries as well. This condition has helped me to understand why some of these crimes happen. Though injustice collecting may be pretty common, and plenty of people do hold grudges, there are degrees of severity, and only the most extreme levels lead to mass violence. One trend I noticed is that some of these injustice collectors treated other people well until they were wronged. The Killdozer operator was known as a nice, down-to-earth guy. The ex-LAPD officer was remembered by some people who knew him as level-headed, normal, and capable of disagreeing without becoming enraged, and even the Bath school bomber helped out neighbors with maintenance issues for free. Another trend I noticed is that most of these perpetrators targeted specific people they believed had wronged them, and also attacked people at random who had no connection to them. They may have believed that society more broadly had wronged them, and decided to take revenge on society as a whole. Reading Mary Ellen O'Toole's article gave me a lot of insight to this pattern, and made me realize several cases I had already looked at in my research were committed by injustice collectors. Her article also goes over some specific cases. In my cases, several of the perpetrators are older. The Killdozer and Bath school attackers were in their 50s, and the elementary school bomber and McDonald's shooter were in their 40s, which made me consider that injustice collectors may tend to be older when they exact their revenge. However, Mary Ellen O'Toole did find many school attackers who fit the injustice collector profile, and I'm sure some of them were young students. Thank you for watching. Any feedback is appreciated. If you're interested, my videos are based on what I found researching for my novel, Tyler's Only Friend, about a fictional active shooting at a college party.